Hello, gentle viewers, and welcome to another episode of Alistair Reviews It. Today, before starting the review, I just want to say thank you to everybody. Thank you for the 16K. I just got above 15K to 16K. I think that this has been one of the biggest hurdles for me for YouTube, and I want to tell everybody who has subscribed or has watched my videos, who has engaged, who has let me fanboy on and discovered these new worlds with me. I just want to say a very heartfelt thank you, and I'm very happy to have you guys on for the ride. Thank you. Today I'm going to be reviewing Black Sun, the first book in the Between Earth and Skies trilogy by acclaimed author Rebecca Roanhorse. The book premiered on October 13th of 2020, which is the day before my birthday, to really good critical release. It made it to the top 10 at fantasy books for Goodreads, and it also made it on my top 10 books I read during 2020. This book review, like most of my book reviews, is going to be split into a spoiler-free portion where I review a spoiler-free portion of the book, and then towards the end I will give my spoilery thoughts. I will put up a banner when I do spoiler thoughts so everybody knows, and then I'll put a time stamp so that you guys know which time to skip to if you want to skip past these spoilery thoughts. Please, if you've read the book and you want to talk about it in a spoilery way, down below at the top, put spoiler warning, space, and then your comments. If you want to do a more in-depth discussion, you can always go to my Discord in the description box below, and we can open up a Discord to have some discourse about this promising first book in this epic fantasy trilogy. A god will return when the earth and sky converge under the black sun. In the holy city of Tova, the winter solstice is usually a time for celebration and renewal. But this year it coincides with a solar eclipse, a rare celestial event, prescribed by the sun priest as an unbalancing of the world. Meanwhile, a ship launches from a distant city, bound for Tova, set to arrive on the solstice. The captain of the ship, Ziala, is a disgraced Teak whose song can calm the waters around her as easily as it can warp a man's mind. Her ship carries one passenger, described as harmless. The passenger, Serapio, is a young man, blind, scarred, and cloaked in destiny. As Ziala well knows, when a man is described as harmless, he usually ends up being the villain. Crafted with unforgettable characters, Rebecca Roanhorse's epic adventure exploring the decadence of power amidst a weight of history and the struggle of individuals swimming against the confines of society and their broken pasts is the most original series debut of the decade. Dun, dun, dun. The world building in this book is inspired by pre-Columbian Americas. Most of this book takes place within a peninsula, and throughout this book we encounter many diverse peoples with very diverse belief systems. And much of the lore and magic in these books is inspired by North and South native cultures. For example, you have the city of Tova, which for me reminds me a lot of the Aztec and Mayan culture, where there are these sky clans that have these powerful animals that fly, except for one that swims, and that are their patron animals for their clans. And then you have the sun priest who oversees all of these clans. But then you have uh, other cultures that we kind of go through. You have the Obreji. One of the main characters comes from the Obreji lands, which are very far away from this peninsula, and you have this character traveling through other people's cultures and lands, so you're able to kind of experience that while you go through. It's very different from, like, I would say, more European westernized inspired fantasy, where they go through, there's always a very big adventure travel, not always, there's typically a very big adventure travel plot in most epic fantasy, but most of the time, not always, I want to say, they travel through the same towns and cities, all the same blueprint one after the other, after the other, after the other, unless they happen upon like elves or dwarves or something uh, else like this. But this is no, this is just people who have different cultures, and I think that's very refreshing, and I really like that. But I do want to say one of the things I get from these sky clans is that their patron magical creatures probably correlate with gods, because we have the crow god that is mentioned a lot in this text, and I think makes kind of an appearance in a way. I don't know. You judge, you find out. And so that was pretty interesting to me to have these connections that are not only religious, but they're magical, they're real. And when I say religious, I don't mean that the religion isn't real. I'm just saying that you can be religious and pray towards something or worship something, and it not take a very blatant effect in most people's lives. But in this case, it's an example of that actually happening. So the characters I want to talk about. So there's three characters that we get the most of in this book. We have Ziala, who is a who is a diagnosed, who is a disgraced teak, a race of women who live on a floating isle, who have the ability to sing, and when you sing, they're able to control the water to a certain extent and be able to influence people, mostly men, I think. And then she's also bisexual. And then we have Serapia, who is a blind Obreji, and the possible avatar for an entity. I just want to say, a possible avatar for an entity. And then we have Narampa, who I think had the most refreshing and most interesting portion of this book. And I know a lot of people would probably disagree with me, but I loved reading about her portions of the book. And she is the unlikely sun priest and the leader of the city of Tova. I, as a queer person, as a gay person, and as a person who really, really, really loves fantasy, I am so grateful to Rebecca Roanhorse for having actual queer characters in an epic adult fantasy book. An epic high adult fantasy book. It isn't an urban fantasy. It doesn't take place within our world. This is an actual fantasy world that she built, which is inspired from the pre-Columbian Americas, but it's a world that she built, and I'm so grateful to have gay queer characters in an epic fantasy book because I love fantasy so much. I love fantasy so freaking much, but it just breaks my heart every time I read a book that I love with narratives that I love, and I just don't see gay people represented. And it's not that they're not just that they're not represented, it's that they feel actively world built outside of the narrative because it just doesn't make sense for there not to be any gay characters in a 14 book series where you have in a 14 book series where you have thousands of characters and maybe at one point there might be a slight allusion to a woman having maybe a relationship with another woman. It just doesn't make sense that there's no gay characters, and this is why a lot of people in the gay community have stands. And we have Stucky and we have Castiel or whatever that is, and we look at these narratives and we see the queer baiting that we get, and we add those characters together, and then we're criticized for queer baiting, but we aren't provided characters in which to identify with, so we have to take what we're given, which is queer baiting, and just create those characters for us and create that fan fiction. And I just want to say, I'm very thankful because we're getting a lot more queer characters in urban fantasy. We're getting definitely a lot more queer characters in contemporary. But what we need is also queer characters, gay characters, lesbian characters, non-binary characters in epic fantasy. So thank you, Rebecca Runhorse. Thank you so much. Okay, so sorry. Ziela is a pirate. She is the perfect example of a pirate and also an unlikely pirate because there is some sexism. She is a woman, but the teak culture is all about women, so it's very interesting where she's coming from, where she is an unburdened woman, uh, where she's an unburdened woman who doesn't feel the way I think that most other women would feel in some of these cultures, because she didn't grow up with the thought that, maybe she wasn't supposed to be doing certain things, like being a sailor. So there's a lot of prejudice against her, both for her being a teak and for her being a woman in a man's job. I really loved her character. I think that Rebecca Roanhorse did an amazing job of writing each of these three characters in a very particular way, where you kind of felt their approach to whatever's going on in their story. It felt very unique towards each character. So I think she did an amazing job with characterization. For Serapio, we go through his process little by little. He's the only one who, well, actually, never mind. Narampa has some flashbacks, but he's the one that we have the most flashbacks from. I'd say that he would be the one that we focus on the past the most for this book, and I really, really enjoyed it. I think that each time that we went into Serapio's past, it was one more piece of the puzzle that create a more like perfect vision of what was going on in this world. And then for Narampa, she's a sun priest of Tova City, and she is an unlikely leader in this time. She's not somebody who would typically be in this role. So I would say for all three of them, all three of these people have been thrust into these roles that they wouldn't typically, I would say, be a part of, or wouldn't typically, you know, make the choice of being a part of those roles, but thrust into those roles, and they have to be able to perform in order to accomplish their goals. And I really like that. It in a lot of ways it makes all three of them underdogs in this story, and who does not root for an underdog? In terms of plot, this is part of an adventure plot. I mean, we have Ziala who travels throughout. We have Serapio who also travels throughout, and then we have Narampa who, for the most part, stays in the same region. But it is an adventure kind of travel fantasy story, where there is a deadline, the winter solstice, because when the winter solstice comes, there is a certain celestial divergence, I would say, that allows for certain parties in this book to make certain strategic changes. So everybody is trying to beat the time to be able to accomplish their own goals uh, before the winter solstice comes. So you do kind of get that pacing with the book where everything is leading up to this final climax. That is it for sorry. So that is it for my spoiler-free portion of this review. I would like to talk about this book in a very spoilery way for a second, and then we will wrap up this review. Okay, so without further ado, I want to say that again, Narampa was my favorite. Loved her. I really liked her complicated relationship with her bodyguard and lover, because for me it just didn't make sense. Like uh, Z kept on Z kept on betraying her left and right, and I could tell that Z did not believe that Narampa had what it took to be the Sun Priest, but also Z loved Narampa, so Z thought that Z was protecting Narampa. Meanwhile, Z really wasn't, and Z betrayed Narampa time and time again. And then you want to hit her over the head as a character because she keeps on allowing other people to just step on her again and again and again. And she justifies it. So every time that she lets it happen, she justifies it. She's like, no, I can't do this right now. I need to wait. I need to be more strategic about what I'm doing. But she isn't being more strategic, which makes me very frustrated. And I think that's why a lot of people didn't like her character. But I liked her because of that. I like when characters make really stupid decisions, but then learn from the decisions that they have made. And I think that she's starting to learn from her decisions, where you can't be as trustworthy as she was. And sometimes when there's a fire, you put it out before it gets big. For Ziala, I loved that she was a chaotic bisexual, as some people call it. I really, her parts of the story just felt so nuanced, and I loved that she was, a mer person. Eh, I did not expect it at all, and the kind of persecution that she experienced throughout the book. I really liked that, and I liked the relationship that her and Serapio started to develop. I think that Roanhorse did a really good job of getting the relationships to start organic by these two people who are alienated by everybody around them. And because they're alienated by everybody around them, they're drawn more close to each other. And that made a lot of sense to me. Serapio, we get a lot of his background. His portion of the story, from what I've seen, actually any of them, but his in particular, she she could take 5 books. Rebecca Roanhorse could take 5 books just going through his entire background story up until the end of the Winter Solstice. I think it was very interesting. I want to know what happened to all of his tutors. I want to know a lot more. We start this book with his first chapter, and let me tell you, that was a way. That is the way to start a book. It was so good. And I do want to say it's very interesting how him and Ziala's their relationship is, and how their sexual relationship is, um, and like what their two goals are. At the end of this book, we have him becoming the actual avatar for the Crow God. We don't know if he's in there anymore. And we have Ziala kind of stuck in the city, and we have the same for Narampa. So for me at this point, I'm very curious as to what's going to be going on in the second and third books. And I'm very curious because I think that Rebecca Roanhorse spent a little bit more time with Serapio in this first book, whether she's going to focus a little bit more on a particular character for each of the books in the trilogy. I'm not sure. So, um, I think the spoilery portion ended a little bit early, um, but this book was a good one, guys, and I'm very much looking forward to the next installment. Please let me know your thoughts. Are you going to pick up this book? Does this sound interesting to you? Please like, subscribe, ding that bell if you will, and I'll see you guys next time. Adios, gentle viewers.